A newborn child was sentenced to death by royal decree, hidden in a basket among river reeds, raised inside the palace of the very ruler who ordered his execution, and decades later returned to demand that same ruler release an enslaved nation. Good evening and welcome. Tonight we begin a full chronological examination of Moses, one of the most consequential figures in biblical and ancient Near Eastern history. This will not be a simplified devotional overview. We will follow the record primarily found in the book of Exodus, supported by the broader Pentateuch narrative, moving step by step through political context, royal policy, desert exile, divine commissioning, imperial confrontation, national migration, and legal formation. Every stage will be examined in sequence, with attention to cause and consequence. The story of Moses unfolds in a transformed Egypt. Generations earlier, Joseph had centralized economic power under Pharaoh during famine. Now, that centralized monarchy faced a demographic shift. Tehebos, once welcomed, had multiplied into a large population within Egyptian borders. We will examine how political fear escalated into forced labor, how labor evolved into targeted population control, and how one child survived under a policy designed to eliminate his generation. This matters because Moses' leadership cannot be understood apart from the imperial system he confronted. From there, we will move into the royal household where Moses was raised. He was educated as an Egyptian elite, trained within the structures of the empire he would later challenge. We will analyze the turning point that led him to kill an Egyptian overseer, the consequences that forced him into exile in Midian, and the 40-year period that reshaped him from palace figure to desert shepherd. The narrative does not move quickly. Decades passed before Moses re-enters Egyptian politics. We will then examine the burning bush encounter, not as abstract symbolism, but as a commissioning moment that defined mission and authority. We will follow the structured confrontation with Pharaoh, the escalation of plagues, the political resistance within Egypt, and the breaking point that led to the Exodus. We will analyze how a slave population transitioned into a mobile nation, how leadership was tested under pressure, and how covenant law was established at Sinai. Few figures stand at the intersection of imperial power, national liberation, and legal formation the way Moses does. The central question we will track is this: how did a man shaped by two identities, Hebrew by birth and Egyptian by upbringing, become the leader who dismantled the labor system of the most powerful empire in his region? Was his influence primarily political, prophetic, or legislative? The answer unfolds across decades of preparation, crises, and confrontation. If you value structured, long-form biblical analysis grounded in sequence and context, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It directly supports deeper studies like this one. In the comments, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there, and answer this specific question. Do you see Moses primarily as a deliverer, a prophet, or a loggerand? Why? Now we begin where the pressure first intensified. Inside Egypt, under a Pharaoh who saw demographic growth as a national threat. When the book of Exodus opens, Egypt is politically stable, but strategically cautious. Generations have passed since Joseph's administration preserved the kingdom during famine. The Hebrews, once protected under Joseph's authority, have multiplied significantly in the land of Goshen. This demographic expansion is emphasized in the text. They were fruitful, increased greatly, multiplied, and became exceedingly strong. What had begun as an extended family had developed into a substantial ethnic population inside Egyptian borders. In centralized monarchies, population growth among foreign groups can alter political calculations. A new pharaoh arose, who did not know Joseph. This phrase signals a shift in political loyalty rather than simple ignorance of past events. Dynastic transitions often reset alliances and priorities. The new ruler evaluated the Hebrew population not in light of past famine cooperation, but in terms of present strategic risk. He addressed his people directly, stating that the Israelites had become too numerous and too powerful. His concern centered on potential wartime alliance with Egypt's enemies. If conflict erupted, the Hebrews might support opposition forces and weaken Egypt from within. Instead of expelling them immediately, Pharaoh implemented controlled suppression. Taskmasters were appointed over the Israelites, and forced labor was imposed. They were compelled to build supply cities, including Pithom and Ramesses. These cities likely functioned as storage and administrative centers, tied to trade routes and state logistics. Forced labor was not random punishment. It was economic exploitation integrated into national infrastructure. The goal was to weaken morale, restrict mobility, and harness labor capacity for imperial projects. However, the policy did not produce the intended demographic reduction. The text states that the more the Israelites were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. Oppression increased anxiety within the Egyptian leadership. Demographic expansion combined with labor resentment created a perceived security threat. Pharaoh's strategy escalated. He summoned the Hebrew midwives, identified as Shipra and Puah, and ordered them to kill male infants at birth. This approach targeted long-term military potential without openly attacking adult laborers. The midwives did not comply. They allowed the male children to live, and later justified their actions by claiming Hebrew women delivered before assistance could arrive. Whether motivated by reverence for God, moral conviction, or refusal to become instruments of genocide, their resistance disrupted Pharaoh's plan. As a result, the king expanded the decree beyond private instruction. He commanded all his people to cast every Hebrew male child into the Nile. The policy shifted from covert control to public extermination order. This decree created the political and social environment into which Moses would be born. The Nile, the source of Egypt's agricultural prosperity, became the tool designated for destruction of Hebrew sons. Imperial authority had now crossed from exploitation into elimination. The next part will follow. 1. Levite family confronted by this decree and the decision that would place a child at the center of Egypt's royal household. Against this backdrop of escalating state policy, a child was born into the tribe of Levi. His parents are later identified as Amram and Job, but at the moment of his birth, the text focuses not on lineage prestige, but on vulnerability. The decree was clear. Every Hebrew male infant was to be cast into the Nile. This was not selective enforcement. It was a public order backed by royal authority. Any family hiding a son risked exposure and punishment. The decision to preserve a male child required deliberate resistance against state power. Jochebed concealed the child for 3 months. This detail matters because concealment within close-knit labor communities would have been difficult. Crying infants attracted tension, and Egyptian oversight over Hebrew populations was already intensified. The longer the concealment continued, the greater the risk became. Eventually, when hiding him was no longer feasible, his mother made a calculated decision. She constructed a small basket made of papyrus reeds, coated it with bitumen and pitch to make it waterproof, and placed the child inside. The basket was then set among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. This act was both desperate and strategic. The Nile had been designated as the instrument of death for Hebrew sons. By placing the child into the river in a controlled container rather than abandoning him directly to the water, Jochebed complied externally with the decree while preserving the possibility of survival. The location among the reeds suggests deliberate positioning rather than random abandonment. The child's sister, later identified as Miriam, stood at a distance to observe what would happen. The family did not relinquish responsibility. They monitored the outcome. Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe at the river, accompanied by her attendants. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent a servant to retrieve it. When she opened it, she saw the child crying. The text records that she recognized him as one of the Hebrew children. This recognition is significant. She understood the decree and knew the political implications, yet she chose compassion over compliance. At that moment, royal authority intersected with maternal instinct. The survival of the child depended not on military force or rebellion, but on an individual decision inside the royal household. Miriam then approached Pharaoh's daughter and offered to find a Hebrew nurse to care for the child. Pharaoh's daughter agreed. Miriam brought the child's own mother to nurse him, effectively returning him to his family under royal protection. Pharaoh's daughter paid Jochebed wages to nurse her own son. This arrangement reversed the intended outcome of the decree. The state that ordered the child's death now financed his early upbringing. The irony is structural. The policy designed to eliminate Hebrew males became the mechanism through which one was preserved. When the child grew older, he was brought into Pharaoh's household and adopted as her son. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." The name itself reflected the circumstances of his rescue. Moses would grow up within the Egyptian palace, educated in the culture, language, and administrative systems of the empire that had ordered his death. His early survival was not accidental but shaped by layered decisions. Parental resistance, royal compassion, and strategic timing. The decree that sought to destroy a generation had preserved the very individual who would later confront the throne. The next act will follow Moses' upbringing in Egypt and the decisive event that forced him into exile. Moses' early years unfolded within the Egyptian royal household, a setting defined by education, hierarchy, and political structure. Although born into the tribe of Levi, he was raised as the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter. This dual identity shaped his development. On one side, he was biologically Hebrew, connected by lineage to an oppressed people. On the other, he was socially Egyptian, trained within the administrative and cultural systems of the most powerful empire in the region. This tension between origin and upbringing would later influence his decisions. The biblical text provides limited detail about his youth, but later references, particularly in Acts 7, indicate that Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. Egyptian education for elite males included literacy, governance, principles, military training, and exposure to religious systems. Palace upbringing meant familiarity with court procedure, diplomatic protocol, and centralized administration. Moses would have understood how authority functioned within imperial structures long before he ever challenged them. Despite this environment, the text notes that when Moses had grown up, he went out to his own people and looked on their burdens. This moment marks a shift from passive awareness to active observation. He did not remain confined to palace life. He deliberately visited the Hebrew labor sites and witnessed their forced labor conditions. The oppression that had begun generations earlier was ongoing. Supply city construction and state labor programs continued under Egyptian supervision. Moses' exposure to this reality forced him to confront the gap between his position and his ancestry. The decisive event followed quickly. Moses saw an Egyptian striking a Hebrew, one of his own people. The altercation was not described as minor. It represented the daily enforcement of forced labor. Moses looked around to ensure no one was watching and killed the Egyptian. He then hid the body in the sand. This action was calculated rather than impulsive. He assessed visibility before intervening. However, it represented a break with Egyptian loyalty. By killing an Egyptian overseer, Moses aligned himself decisively with the oppressed rather than the ruling class. The following day, Moses encountered two Hebrews fighting. When he attempted to intervene, one of them responded, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" This statement revealed that his act was known. The concealment had failed. Word of the killing reached Pharaoh. From the perspective of the throne, Moses' action constituted murder and political betrayal. Pharaoh sought to kill him. The prince raised within the palace became a fugitive. Moses fled Egypt and went to the land of Midian. The transition from palace official to desert exile was immediate and irreversible. His life divided into two distinct phases: 40 years in Egypt, followed by decades outside its borders. The next part will follow Moses' life in Midian and the transformation that occurred away from imperial structures. Moses' flight to Midian marked a decisive break from Egyptian political life. Midian was located east of the Sinai Peninsula, outside the direct control of Egypt. By crossing into this territory, Moses placed himself beyond Pharaoh's immediate reach. The shift was not temporary relocation, but long-term exile. The man raised in a royal court now entered a pastoral environment defined by tribal leadership rather than imperial administration. This geographic move also represented a psychological transition from structured authority to anonymity. Upon arriving in Midian, Moses encountered a group of women drawing water at a well. Shepherding in that region required access to limited water sources, and wells often became points of conflict between groups. The daughters of a priest of Midian were being driven away by other shepherds. Moses intervened and defended them, then watered their flock. This action reflects continuity in his character. In Egypt, he had intervened when witnessing injustice. In Midian, he acted again when observing mistreatment. However, the scale differed. This was not imperial politics, but local dispute. The women returned to their father, identified as Reuel, also called Jethro. Surprised at their early return, he learned that an Egyptian had delivered them from harassment. The description of Gypsy indicates that Moses' appearance and manner still reflected his upbringing. He had not yet shed the visible markers of his former life. Reuel invited him to stay. Over time, Moses married Zipporah, one of Reuel's daughters, and began tending his father-in-law's flocks. This transition anchored him within Midianite society. The shift from palace education to shepherding was substantial. Shepherding required mobility, endurance, and knowledge of terrain rather than court strategy. Moses spent extended periods guiding flocks through desert regions, including the area later identified as Horeb or Sinai. This environment removed him from direct engagement with Egyptian governance, but exposed him to wilderness geography that would later become critical during the Exodus. The desert was no longer foreign terrain, it became familiar ground. During this period, Moses' first son was born, and he named him Gershom, saying, "I have been a sojourner in a foreign land." The name reflects self-awareness of displacement. Though safe from Pharaoh's immediate threat, Moses did not consider Midian his homeland. He remained aware of his separation from both Egypt and his Hebrew people. The text does not describe him attempting to return during these years. Exile extended over decades, suggesting acceptance of permanent displacement. Meanwhile, conditions in Egypt did not improve for the Israelites. The king who sought Moses' life eventually died, but the oppression of the Hebrews continued. The text records that the Israelites groaned because of their slavery and cried out. Their cry for rescue rose to God. This statement transitions the narrative from Moses' personal exile to a broader national crisis. The stage was set for intersection between divine commissioning and human preparation. Moses, now a shepherd in Midian for many years, had moved from prince to fugitive to pastoral leader. He no longer occupied the political sphere, yet his knowledge of Egypt and his familiarity with wilderness terrain positioned him uniquely for what would follow. The next part will examine the encounter at Horeb that transformed his exile into mission. After decades in Midian, Moses' life had settled into routine pastoral leadership. He led the flock of his father-in-law beyond the wilderness, eventually reaching Horeb, identified as the mountain of God. This geographic detail is important because Horeb, also called Sinai, would later become the central location for covenant formation. At this stage, however, Moses was not seeking revelation. He was tending sheep. The encounter that followed disrupted a long-established pattern of exile and stability. Moses saw a bush that was burning yet not consumed. Fire was not uncommon in desert regions, but sustained combustion without destruction was unusual enough to draw attention. Moses turned aside to observe the phenomenon more closely. The narrative emphasizes this decision. He did not ignore what he saw. He approached it. At that moment, the voice of God called to him from the bush. The instruction was immediate and clear. "Remove your sandals, for the ground on which you stand is holy." The encounter shifted from curiosity to commissioning. God identified himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This declaration connected Moses' present isolation with ancestral covenant history. The God of the patriarchs had not withdrawn during Israel's oppression in Egypt. The statement reframed Moses' personal exile within a larger narrative. God then declared that he had seen the affliction of his people in Egypt, heard their cry, and knew their suffering. The language moves from observation to intention. Deliverance was not abstract. It was imminent. The commission followed directly. Moses was instructed to return to Egypt and bring the Israelites out of bondage. This command confronted the very place he had fled decades earlier. The political structure that once sought his death remained intact, even though the specific Pharaoh had died. Moses immediately raised objections. He questioned his own qualification, asking who he was to confront Pharaoh and lead Israel out. His resistance was not dramatic, but measured. Exile had reduced his self-assessment of authority. God responded with assurance of presence rather than expanded explanation. The promise was not that Moses would succeed through personal strength, but that he would not act alone. A sign was provided. When the people were brought out of Egypt, they would worship on that same mountain. The sign was future-oriented. Moses would recognize fulfillment only after obedience. This required trust before visible outcome. Moses then asked what name he should declare to the Israelites when they questioned him. The answer, "I am who I am," introduced a theological dimension central to Israel's identity. The name emphasized self-existence and continuity. The God who spoke to Moses was not a localized deity, but the covenant God of their ancestors. This self-identification reinforced legitimacy before both Israelites and Pharaoh. The encounter at Horeb transformed Moses from exile shepherd into commissioned deliverer. The mountain that had symbolized isolation became the launching point for confrontation. The next part will examine Moses' continued resistance, the confirmation signs provided, and his eventual return to Egypt. The commissioning at Horeb did not immediately resolve Moses' hesitation. After hearing the divine mandate to return to Egypt, he continued raising objections. His first concern had been personal inadequacy. Now, he anticipated resistance from the Israelites themselves. He asked what would happen if they did not believe him or accept that the God of their fathers had appeared to him. This question reflects realistic assessment. Moses understood that leadership requires credibility, especially among an oppressed population accustomed to broken expectations. In response, he was given tangible signs. His staff, when cast to the ground, became a serpent, and then returned to a staff when grasped again. His hand, when placed inside his cloak, became leprous, and then was restored. The third sign involved turning water from the Nile into blood. These signs were not random displays. They directly confronted Egyptian symbolic systems. The serpent held royal associations in Egypt. The Nile was central to agricultural and religious identity. The signs demonstrated authority over elements Egypt considered foundational. Yet Moses raised another objection, this time focused on speech. He claimed that he was not eloquent, slow of speech and tongue. Whether this reflected actual limitation or diminished confidence after years in exile, it reveals reluctance to assume public leadership. The response emphasized divine sovereignty over human capacity. Moses was assured that the Creator formed the mouth and would be with him in speaking. Still, Moses asked that someone else be sent. At this point, the narrative records divine anger, but also accommodation. Aaron, Moses' brother, was appointed as spokesperson. This arrangement preserved Moses' leadership while addressing his hesitation. Aaron would speak on Moses' behalf, but Moses would remain the one receiving instruction. The partnership balanced prophetic authority and public communication. With this provision in place, Moses accepted the mission. He returned to Jethro, informed him of his intention to visit his people in Egypt, and prepared for departure. The exile phase was ending. As Moses journeyed back toward Egypt, he carried the staff that had become the instrument of signs. The text notes that the king of Egypt, who had sought his life, had died. The immediate threat that forced his flight no longer existed, but the structure of oppression remained. The Israelites were still under forced labor, and the policy environment that had begun with demographic fear had evolved into entrenched exploitation. Before re-entering Egypt, Moses encountered a brief and complex episode involving covenant obligation within his own household. The narrative records that Zipporah intervened to circumcise their son, fulfilling a covenant requirement tied to Abrahamic identity. This moment underscores that leadership of Israel required alignment with covenant standards at the family level. Moses' return was not merely political, it was covenantal. With signs in hand and Aaron a spokesman, Moses approached the land he had fled decades earlier. The prince-turned-fugitive was now returning as commissioned representative. The next act will begin with his first confrontation before Pharaoh and the escalation that followed. Moses did not begin by confronting Pharaoh immediately. Upon returning to Egypt, he first gathered the elders of Israel. Aaron spoke the words that the Lord had given to Moses, and the signs were performed before them. The staff became a serpent, and Moses' hand was shown to transform and be restored. These signs were not random displays. They functioned as validation of divine commission. The elders and the people believed when they heard that the Lord had visited them and seen their affliction. They bowed their heads and worshipped. This initial acceptance was critical. Without internal recognition, external confrontation would have failed before it began. Only after securing this acknowledgement did Moses and Aaron enter Pharaoh's presence. Their message was direct and formal. "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." The request was framed as a religious observance, rather than immediate permanent departure. It proposed a journey into the wilderness to worship. This framing was strategic. It tested Pharaoh's willingness to acknowledge an authority outside his own, without immediately dismantling Egypt's labor system. Pharaoh's response revealed the deeper dimension of the conflict. He asked, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go?" This was not merely dismissal, it was a statement of sovereignty. In Egyptian political theology, Pharaoh himself was associated with divine authority. To recognize another deity's command over his labor force would undermine imperial ideology. Pharaoh explicitly declared that he did not know the Lord and would not let Israel go. The confrontation was now defined as a contest of authority. Instead of granting relief, Pharaoh intensified labor requirements. He accused the Israelites of idleness, interpreting their requests for worship as evidence that they had too much time. He ordered that no more straw be provided for brickmaking. The Israelites were required to gather straw themselves, while maintaining the same production quota. This change significantly increased daily labor demands. Straw functioned as binding material in brick production. Without it, brick quality suffered, yet output expectations remained unchanged. The policy was designed to break morale and discredit Moses' leadership. The Hebrew foremen were held responsible for quota failures and beaten when production targets were not met. They appealed directly to Pharaoh, arguing that the fault lay with the new straw policy, not with worker negligence. Pharaoh dismissed them and reiterated his accusation of idleness. When the foremen left the palace, they confronted Moses and Aaron, blaming them for worsening conditions. From their perspective, intervention had produced retaliation. Hope had translated into hardship. Moses then turned back to the Lord and questioned the outcome. He asked why he had been sent if the result was increased suffering. This moment reflects realistic leadership tension. He had obeyed the command, yet the situation deteriorated. The response he received reframed the escalation as part of a broader demonstration. Pharaoh would resist so that power might be displayed through successive acts. The confrontation would unfold in stages, not in immediate compliance. This initial exchange established the pattern that would define the coming plagues. Pharaoh denied authority. Labor intensified. The Israelites experienced backlash. Moses confronted uncertainty. The stage was now set for a series of escalating signs that would move beyond symbolic validation and begin directly challenging Egypt's stability. The next part will examine the first wave of plagues and the response of Egypt's magicians after the initial refusal and the intensification of labor. The confrontation between Moses and Pharaoh entered a new phase. This stage would not rely solely on spoken demand but on demonstrative acts designed to reveal authority. Moses and Aaron returned to Pharaoh, and Aaron cast down his staff before the king and his servants. It became a serpent. In response, Pharaoh summoned his magicians and sorcerers. They performed similar acts through their secret arts, and their staffs also became serpents. However, Aaron's staff swallowed theirs. This detail matters because it established hierarchy. The Egyptian signs were replicated, but ultimately overpowered. Despite this visible demonstration, Pharaoh's heart was hardened. He refused to release the Israelites. The confrontation escalated from symbolic sign to environmental disruption. The first plague targeted the Nile. Moses struck the water with his staff, and the river turned to blood. Fish died, the river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink from it. The Nile was central to Egypt's agricultural and religious identity. It was not only a water source, but a foundation of economic stability. Disruption of the Nile represented direct challenge to Egypt's security. Yet the Egyptian magicians replicated the act on a smaller scale, and Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. He turned and went into his house without relenting. After 7 days, the second plague followed. Frogs covered the land, entering houses, ovens, and kneading bowls. This invasion moved from environmental to domestic disruption. Pharaoh summoned Moses and asked him to plead for removal of the frogs, promising to let the people go. When the frogs were removed and piled in heaps, relief returned, but Pharaoh hardened his heart again. The third plague involved gnats arising from the dust of the earth. This time, the magicians attempted replication but failed. They told Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." This acknowledgement is significant. For the first time, Egyptian officials recognized a power beyond their capacity. Yet Pharaoh's resistance continued. The fourth plague brought swarms of flies that corrupted the land. At these days, a distinction was made. The land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, was spared. This separation demonstrated controlled targeting rather than random disaster. Pharaoh offered partial concession. He suggested that the Israelites sacrificed within Egypt. Moses refused, stating that their worship practices would be offensive to Egyptians and provoke violence. Pharaoh then proposed allowing them to go, but not far. This negotiation reveals strategic hesitation. Pharaoh sought compromise that preserved labor while appearing responsive. When the flies were removed, he again hardened his heart and withdrew the offer. The pattern was established. Plague, temporary concession, relief, renewed refusal. Each act increased pressure on Egypt's environment and authority structure. The distinction between Egypt and Goshen emphasized controlled intervention. The confrontation was no longer limited to verbal exchange. It was altering national stability. The next part will examine the intensification of plagues affecting livestock, health, and natural systems, pushing Egypt closer to collapse. The escalation continued with the fifth plague, which struck Egypt's livestock. Horses, donkeys, camels, herds, and flocks in the field died. Livestock formed the backbone of agricultural productivity and transportation capacity. Their loss represented economic damage beyond symbolic challenge. Yet once again, a distinction was made. The livestock of the Israelites in Goshen remained unharmed. Pharaoh sent to verify this separation and confirmed that not one of Israel's animals had died. Despite this verification, he refused to release the people. The pattern of observation without compliance continued. The sixth plague shifted from economic loss to physical suffering. Moses and Aaron took soot from a keel and scattered it into the air before Pharaoh. It became fine dust, causing boils on humans and animals throughout Egypt. This plague directly affected bodies rather than infrastructure. Even the magicians, who had earlier replicated signs, could not stand before Moses because of the boils. The officials who once challenged Moses' authority were now incapacitated, yet Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. Physical pain did not produce surrender. The seventh plague escalated further into environmental devastation. Moses warned Pharaoh in advance that a severe hailstorm would strike Egypt. Unlike any before it, he advised that livestock and servants remaining in the field should be brought under shelter. Some Egyptian officials heeded the warning and protected their property. Others ignored it. When the hail fell, it destroyed crops, shattered trees, and killed exposed animals and servants. Fire flashed continually within the hail, intensifying destruction. This was not localized disruption. It was national-scale damage. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and acknowledged wrongdoing, stating that he had sinned and that the Lord was righteous. He promised to let the Israelites go if the hail ceased. Moses prayed, and the storm stopped. However, once relief returned, Pharaoh hardened his heart again. The temporary confession did not produce lasting change. The agricultural cycle had now been severely damaged. Wheat and spelt were spared because they were late in the season, but major crops were lost. Egypt's food supply was The eighth plague targeted what remained of agricultural recovery. Locusts swept across the land, consuming what the hail had left behind. Fields that survived earlier destruction were stripped completely. Pharaoh's servants began urging him to release the Israelites. Recognizing the scale of damage, Pharaoh summoned Moses again and offered partial permission, asking who would go. Moses insisted that men, women, children, and livestock must all go. Pharaoh attempted to limit departure to men only. When Moses refused compromise, Pharaoh drove them out from his presence. Darkness followed as the ninth plague. A thick darkness covered Egypt for 3 days, preventing movement. Yet in the dwellings of the Israelites, there was light. Darkness symbolically challenged Egyptian solar deities and practically halted daily function. Pharaoh again proposed compromise, allowing the people to go, but demanding that livestock remain. Moses refused, stating that they did not yet know what would be required for sacrifice. Pharaoh responded with threat. If Moses appeared again before him, he would die. The confrontation had moved from negotiation to final warning. Economic systems were damaged, health was afflicted, agriculture was destroyed, and social order was strained. Yet, Pharaoh's resistance persisted. The next and final plague would strike at the core of Egyptian family structure and authority. After 9 plagues had struck Egypt, escalating in scope, an impact of confrontation entered its final stage. Pharaoh's resistance had survived environmental devastation, economic collapse, and social disruption. Crops had been destroyed, livestock killed, bodies afflicted, and darkness immobilized the land. Yet the throne remained unmoved. At this point, the narrative shifts from public escalation to solemn warning. Moses announced that one final plague would fall upon Egypt, one that would not target infrastructure or environment, but households themselves. The warning was precise. Around midnight, every firstborn in the land of Egypt would die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the servant behind the millstone. Even the firstborn of livestock would be affected. This declaration moved beyond negotiation and into irreversible judgment. In ancient Near Eastern societies, the firstborn son represented inheritance, continuity, and strength of the household. Striking the firstborn meant striking future stability. This plague directly challenged the generational core of Egyptian society. Before this event occurred, instructions were given to the Israelites. Each household was to take a lamb without blemish, slaughter it at twilight, and apply its blood to the doorposts and lintel of the house. The meat was to be eaten that night, roasted with fire, accompanied by unleavened bread and bitter herbs. The meal was to be consumed in readiness, with sandals on feet and staff in hand. This was not ordinary ritual. It marked preparation for immediate departure. The event was named Passover because the Lord would pass over houses marked with blood. At midnight, the plague struck as announced. There was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. The scope of the event was comprehensive, affecting every level of society. Pharaoh rose during the night and summoned Moses and Aaron urgently. This time, there was no negotiation, no compromise. He commanded them to rise, take the Israelites, and go. He even requested a blessing. The resistance that had persisted through 9 plagues collapsed under the weight of the 10th. The Egyptians urged the Israelites to leave quickly, fearing further devastation. The Israelites departed in haste, carrying unleavened dough that had not yet risen. They asked the Egyptians for silver, gold, and clothing, and the Egyptians gave these items freely. This transfer of wealth altered the dynamic of departure. The people who had labored under forced conditions left with material provision. The text records that about 600,000 men on foot departed, besides women and children, along with a mixed multitude in livestock. The scale of migration was national. The confrontation that began with a simple demand for worship in the wilderness ended in mass departure under duress. Pharaoh's authority had been tested and broken. The next act will follow the immediate aftermath of the Exodus, including the pursuit by Pharaoh's army and the crossing of the Red Sea. The Exodus did not unfold as an unstructured escape. After Pharaoh ordered the Israelites to leave, they gathered quickly, but not chaotically. The instructions given before the final plague had prepared them for immediate movement. They carried unleavened dough, wrapped in kneading bowls, bound in cloth. The departure was organized by tribal and family units. The text records approximately 600,000 men on foot, not including women and children, suggesting a population in the millions when total numbers are considered. This was not a small caravan, but a large-scale migration. The Israelites departed from Ramesses to Sukkot. Their route did not take them along the direct coastal road toward Philistine territory, which was shorter and more militarily exposed. Instead, they were led toward the wilderness near the Red Sea. This routing decision is explained in the text. If the people faced war immediately, they might return to Egypt. The path chosen reduced immediate military confrontation but increased geographic challenge. Leadership required balancing risk and endurance. The visible manifestation accompanied them, a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. The description emphasizes continuity. The pillar did not depart from before the people. This functioned as directional guidance and symbolic assurance. Movement was not random. It followed a visible marker. The Israelites were transitioning from forced labor population to mobile nation. Their identity was shifting, but their vulnerability remained significant. They had left quickly and carried provisions, yet they were entering wilderness terrain unfamiliar to most of them. Meanwhile, Pharaoh reconsidered his decision when reports reached him that the Israelites had fled rather than simply journeyed temporarily for worship. His perspective shifted from concession to loss. The labor force that had sustained large-scale building projects was gone. Pharaoh gathered his officials and expressed regret, asking why they had let Israel go from serving them. The departure was reframed as economic loss and political humiliation. He prepared his chariot and assembled a military pursuit force. 600 chosen chariots and all the chariots of Egypt, along with officers over them, pursued the Israelites. Chariots represented Egypt's military advantage, providing speed and coordinated attack capacity. The Israelites, traveling with families and livestock, were not equipped for direct confrontation. As Pharaoh's army approached, the Israelites found themselves encamped by the sea, with mountains on one side and advancing military forces on the other. The geography's limited escape routes. The people reacted with fear and complaint. They accused Moses of bringing them into the wilderness to die and expressed nostalgia for slavery over perceived destruction. This reaction reveals the psychological transition underway. Physical freedom had not yet produced internal confidence. Moses responded by instructing them to stand firm and see the deliverance that would come. The confrontation was no longer between Moses and Pharaoh alone. It now involved an entire population facing imminent capture. The next part will examine the crossing of the sea and the decisive moment that ended Egyptian pursuit. As Pharaoh's army advanced and panic spread through the Israelite camp, the situation appeared tactically impossible. The sea lay before them, and Egyptian chariots closed in behind. The Israelites accused Moses of leading them into a trap, questioning whether graves were lacking in Egypt. Their fear reflects the reality of the moment. They were unarmed civilians facing trained military units with mobility advantage. The psychological transition from enslaved laborers to free people had not yet stabilized under pressure. Moses responded with instruction rather than strategy. He told the people not to fear and to stand firm. He declared that the Egyptians they saw that day would never be seen again. The emphasis shifted from human capability to divine intervention. The pillar of cloud, which had been guiding from the front, moved behind the camp, positioning itself between the Israelites and the Egyptian army. This created a physical and visual barrier. Darkness covered the Egyptian side, while light remained with Israel through the night. Moses was instructed to stretch out his hand over the sea. As he did, a strong east wind blew throughout the night, dividing the waters and exposing dry ground. The text emphasizes duration. The wind acted through the night, suggesting process rather than instantaneous transformation. The waters formed walls on the right and left as the Israelites entered the seabed. The crossing was organized, not chaotic. Families and livestock moved across the exposed path, while the pillar continued separating them from Egyptian forces. When the Egyptian army pursued into the seabed, the situation reversed. During the morning watch, confusion spread among the chariot forces. Wheels became difficult to drive, and the Egyptians recognized that the Lord was fighting for Israel. This acknowledgement came too late. Moses again stretched out his hand over the sea, and the waters returned to their normal flow. The chariots, horsemen, and entire pursuing force were overwhelmed. Not one remained. The military strength that had symbolized Egyptian dominance was neutralized in a single event. On the eastern shore, Israel witnessed the outcome. The bodies of the Egyptians washed up on the seashore. The people saw the great power displayed against Egypt and believed in the Lord and in Moses as his servant. This moment marked a decisive psychological shift. The generation that had known only forced labor now saw the collapse of the empire that had controlled them. Fear transitioned into recognition of deliverance. The crossing of the sea ended immediate military pursuit, but it did not conclude the journey. The people had left Egypt physically, yet they had not yet formed a covenant nation. The wilderness ahead would test their dependence and obedience. The next part will examine the early stages of wilderness travel, including water scarcity, food provision, and the first signs of internal instability. After the crossing of the sea, the Israelites entered the wilderness of Shur. The immediate threat of Egyptian pursuit had ended, but the challenges of survival began almost at once. For 3 days they traveled without finding water. The absence of immediate crises did not remove vulnerability. Large-scale migration through desert terrain required consistent access to water sources, and the population included families, children, and livestock. When they reached Merah and found water that was bitter and undrinkable, frustration returned quickly. The people complained against Moses, asking what they would drink. This reaction reflects a recurring pattern. Crisis leads to fear. Fear leads to complaint. Moses cried out to the Lord, and he was shown a piece of wood, which he threw into the water. The water became sweet. The event combined practical need with instructional response. At Merah, statutes and rules were introduced, and the people were tested. The episode demonstrated that liberation from Egypt did not remove dependence. It relocated it into wilderness conditions. From Merah, they traveled to Elimah, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees. The contrast between scarcity at Merah and abundance at Elim highlights variability in wilderness experience. Provision was not constant in appearance, yet supply existed at critical points. The journey then moved into the wilderness of sin. There, Food scarcity triggered renewed complaint. The people accused Moses and Aaron of bringing them into the wilderness to kill them with hunger, expressing nostalgia for Egypt's food supply, despite its oppression. In response, provision was given in the form of manna. Each morning, a fine, flaky substance appeared on the ground after dew evaporated. The people were instructed to gather only enough for each day. If stored overnight, it bred worms and spoiled, except on the sixth day, when a double portion could be collected to sustain the Sabbath rest. This pattern introduced discipline and rhythm into wilderness life. Dependence was structured daily rather than stockpiled indefinitely. The Sabbath instruction reinforced identity formation distinct from Egyptian labor cycles. Quail were also provided in the evenings, supplying meat in addition to manna. The food system in the wilderness differed from agricultural production in Egypt. It required daily participation and adherence to instruction. The Israelites were no longer bound by taskmasters, yet they were learning new patterns of obedience. Freedom did not eliminate structure, it transformed its source. These early wilderness episodes reveal that deliverance from external control does not immediately produce internal stability. The people oscillated between trust and complaint. Moses functioned as mediator, relaying instruction and addressing crises. The journey was not yet toward settlement, but toward covenant formation. The next part will examine the encounter at Rephidim and the approach to Sinai, where national identity would be formally established. After leaving the wilderness of sin, the Israelites traveled according to stages commanded by the Lord and camped at Rephidim. Once again, there was no water for the people to drink. The repetition of scarcity is significant. Earlier at Merah, water had been made drinkable. Now, at Rephidim, the situation returned under different conditions. The people quarreled with Moses, demanding water and questioning whether the Lord was among them. The complaint had shifted from immediate need to theological doubt. Survival anxiety became spiritual skepticism. Moses responded by crying out to the Lord, expressing fear that the people might stone him. The instruction he received was specific. He was to take the staff with which he struck the Nile, go before the elders of Israel, and strike the rock at Horeb. When he did so, water came out of the rock for the people to drink. The event was witnessed by the elders, reinforcing credibility. The location was named Massah and Meribah, meaning testing and quarreling, marking the site as a memory of dispute. Immediately following this episode, the Israelites faced their first external military threat since leaving Egypt. The Amalekites attacked them at Rephidim. This conflict differed from Egyptian pursuit. It was opportunistic aggression against a migrating population. Moses instructed Joshua to select men and fight, while he stood on the hill with the staff of God in his hand. As long as Moses held up his hands, Israel prevailed. When his hands grew tired and lowered, Amalek gained ground. Aaron and her supported his hands until sunset, and Joshua defeated him. This battle illustrates transition from passive deliverance to active defense. At the Red Sea, Israel did not fight. The sea closed over their pursuers. At Rephidim, Israel engaged in combat. Leadership was distributed to Joshua in battle, Moses interceding, Aaron and her supporting. The nation was learning coordinated response. After the victory, an altar was built and named "The Lord is my banner," linking military survival with divine support. Following the encounter with Amalek, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, visited the camp. He observed Moses judging the people from morning until evening, handling disputes alone. Jethro advised structural delegation. He recommended appointing capable men over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens to judge minor cases, leaving major matters for Moses. This administrative restructuring reduced burnout and created distributed governance. It marked the beginning of organized internal leadership beyond crisis response. The movement from Egypt to Sinai was not simply geographic relocation. It involved psychological transition, military encounter, provision, discipline, and administrative structuring. The people who had left Egypt under urgency were now being shaped into a functioning community. The next act will move to Mount Sinai, where covenant law would define national identity and formalize the relationship between God and Israel. In the 3rd month after departing from Egypt, the Israelites arrived in the wilderness of Sinai and encamped before the mountain. This geographic detail marks a structural turning point in the narrative. Up to this moment, their experience had been defined by departure, pursuit, scarcity, and survival. Sinai represented stability long enough for formal identity formation. The location was not incidental. Horeb, the mountain where Moses had encountered the burning bush years earlier, now became the gathering point for an entire nation. The promise given privately to Moses, "You shall serve God on this mountain," was now moving toward fulfillment. Moses ascended the mountain, and the message he received began with historical framing rather than immediate law. God reminded Israel of what had already occurred. They had seen what was done to Egypt and how they had been carried on eagle's wings and brought into deliverance. This introduction mattered because covenant was grounded in prior action. Liberation preceded legislation. The people were not being asked to earn rescue. They were being invited into structured relationship after rescue. The order of events reinforced that obedience would follow deliverance, not produce it. The covenant proposal was conditional in structure. If Israel obeyed God's voice and kept his covenant, they would become a treasured possession among all peoples, a kingdom of priests, and a holy nation. These titles carried functional meaning. A treasured possession implied distinct status among nations. A kingdom of priests implied mediation representing divine order before other peoples. A holy nation implied separation for defined purpose. The language established vocation and identity simultaneously. Israel's future role was not isolated from other nations, but positioned among them. Moses descended and relayed the proposal to the elders. The people responded collectively, stating that they would do all that the Lord had spoken. This unified verbal agreement constituted preliminary acceptance. However, formal ratification required preparation. The people were instructed to consecrate themselves, wash their garments, and abstain from sexual relations for 2 days. These instructions emphasized ritual readiness and boundary awareness. The physical preparation mirrored internal readiness for covenant engagement. Boundaries were set around the mountain itself. No one was permitted to touch it or cross designated limits. Any person or animal that violated the boundary would be put to death. These restrictions underscored the seriousness of the encounter. Sinai was not merely a meeting place. It was the site of formal divine revelation. Access was mediated through Moses, and proximity required obedience. The mountain became a symbol of ordered distance between divine holiness and human community. On the 3rd day, dramatic phenomena marked the beginning of covenant revelation. Thunder, lightning, dense cloud cover, and an increasingly loud trumpet blast enveloped the mountain. The entire camp trembled. The description highlights sensory intensity. Smoke ascended like that of a furnace, and the mountain shook violently. These elements communicated power and authority. The people were brought to the foot of the mountain, but only Moses ascended further. The separation reinforced hierarchical mediation. The 10 Commandments were then declared. They addressed exclusive allegiance to the Lord, rejection of idols, proper reverence for the divine name, Sabbath observance, and structured social ethics, including honoring parents, prohibiting murder, adultery, theft, false testimony, and coveting. These commands established both vertical loyalty and horizontal justice. They defined the core framework for national conduct. The people, overwhelmed by the manifestation, requested that Moses speak to them instead of hearing directly from the divine voice. Fear transformed initial enthusiasm into cautious distance. Sinai thus marked the formal beginning of Israel as covenant nation. The people who had left Egypt under urgency were now standing before structured law. Deliverance had brought them to freedom. Covenant would define how that freedom was governed. The next part will examine the expansion of civil and ceremonial laws and the formal ratification of the covenant agreement. After the declaration of the 10 Commandments, the covenant framework expanded beyond foundational principles into detailed civil and social regulations. These additional laws, often referred to as the Book of the Covenant, addressed practical matters such as property rights, restitution, personal injury, and social responsibility. This expansion mattered because Israel was no longer merely a liberated population. It was becoming a governed community. Legal structure replaced taskmaster enforcement. Authority would now operate through codified standards rather than imperial command. The civil laws covered issues, including compensation for injury, responsibility for negligence, treatment of servants, and protection of vulnerable individuals such as widows and orphans. These regulations established proportional justice. If harm occurred, restitution was required. If property was damaged, compensation followed. This framework differed from Egyptian forced labor systems, where power dictated outcome. At Sinai, justice was structured through defined principles rather than arbitrary authority. The covenant aimed to create social order grounded in accountability. The covenant also included instructions related to worship and sacred observance. Israel was forbidden to make treaties with neighboring nations' gods or adopt their religious practices. Altars were to be constructed without elaborate stonework, emphasizing simplicity and separation from surrounding cultic systems. Annual festivals were introduced, including the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Harvest, and the Feast of England. These festivals anchored communal memory to historical events and agricultural cycles. Worship was integrated into national rhythm rather than isolated from daily life. Following the presentation of these laws, Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. This documentation step is critical. Oral declaration was followed by written record, preserving continuity beyond the moment. Moses built an altar at the foot of the mountain and set up 12 pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Young men offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. Half of the blood was placed in basins, and half was thrown against the altar. This ritual symbolized shared participation in covenant commitment. Moses then read the Book of the Covenant aloud to the people. They responded again, affirming that they would do all that the Lord had spoken and be obedient. Moses took the remaining blood and sprinkled it on the people, declaring, "Behold, the blood of the covenant." This act formalized the agreement. The covenant was not abstract consent, but sealed through ritual. The relationship between divine authority and national identity was now ratified through documented law and public oath. After this ratification, Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 elders ascended partway up the mountain. They saw a manifestation described as a pavement of sapphire under God's feet, yet they were not harmed. This moment reinforced mediated access. Leadership representatives witnessed confirmation of covenant while remaining within defined boundaries. Sinai was becoming both legislative and symbolic center. The covenant had now moved from proposal to written law to ritual ratification. The next phase would involve detailed instructions for tabernacle construction and sustained divine presence among the people. After the formal ratification of the covenant, Moses was summoned further up the mountain to receive additional instruction. He was told to come up with Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 elders, but only Moses would approach fully. This layered access reinforced hierarchy within covenant structure. The leaders were permitted proximity, yet mediation remained singular through Moses. When they ascended, they saw a manifestation described as a pavement of sapphire under God's feet, clear as the sky itself. The text emphasizes that although they saw, they were not harmed. The encounter balanced visibility with restraint. Moses then entered the cloud that covered the mountain. For 6 days the cloud remained, and on the 7th day he was called from within it. The appearance of the Lord's glory was like a consuming fire on the summit. Moses remained on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. This extended duration indicates that covenant formation required sustained instruction rather than brief declaration. While the foundational laws had already been given, detailed provisions concerning worship and national structure were still to come. The instructions that followed focused heavily on the construction of the tabernacle. The tabernacle would function as a portable sanctuary, allowing divine presence to dwell among the people during their wilderness journey. Specifications were precise. Measurements for the Ark of the Covenant, the table for bread, and the golden lampstand were outlined. Materials such as acacia wood, gold, silver, bronze, fine linen, and specific dyes were required. These details matter because they reflect ordered worship rather than improvised ritual. The Ark was to contain the testimony, later understood as the tablets of the covenant. It would be placed within the most holy place, separated by a veil. The structure of the tabernacle created zones of access, reinforcing mediated approach. Priestly garments were also described in detail, including the ephod, breastpiece, and engraved stones representing the 12 tribes. Worship leadership would not be informal. It would be regulated and symbolically representative of the entire nation. Sacrificial systems were defined, including burnt offerings, grain offerings, and sin offerings. These procedures structured atonement and gratitude within communal life. The Sabbath command was reaffirmed as a sign between God and Israel throughout their generations. Observance of rest would distinguish them from surrounding nations. The covenant extended beyond moral law into liturgical rhythm, architectural design, and priestly function. While Moses remained on the mountain receiving these instructions, the people below experienced delay. The visible mediator had ascended into cloud and fire, and days passed without his return. The extended absence would soon test the people's commitment to the covenant they had just affirmed. The next part will examine the crisis that unfolded during Moses' absence and the immediate consequences of covenant violation. While Moses remained on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, receiving detailed instructions concerning worship, priesthood, and covenant structure, the people below grew impatient. The visible mediator had disappeared into cloud and fire, and no immediate sign of return was evident. The delay created uncertainty. In societies accustomed to tangible symbols of authority, prolonged absence often produces instability. The Israelites approached Aaron and demanded that he make gods to go before them, stating that they did not know what had become of Moses. Aaron responded by instructing them to remove gold earrings from their wives, sons, and daughters. The collected gold was fashioned into a molded calf. This object was presented with the declaration, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." The statement was not merely artistic misdirection. It reinterpreted recent history. Deliverance was reassigned from the Lord to a visible idol. The calf likely reflected Egyptian religious imagery associated with bovine symbolism. The shift represented regression toward familiar imperial iconography. An altar was built before the calf, and a festival was proclaimed. The people offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. They sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. The sequence mirrors covenant ritual, but redirects allegiance. The violation was immediate and structural. It contradicted the first commandment prohibiting other gods, and the second commandment forbidding carved images. The covenant ratified only weeks earlier was breached, before tabernacle construction even began. On the mountain, the Lord informed Moses of the people's actions, describing them as having corrupted themselves. The proposal that followed was severe. Moses was told to stand aside so that the people might be consumed and a new nation formed through him. This moment tested Moses' leadership. Instead of accepting elevation, Ein Desadade, he appealed to the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and argued that destruction would allow Egypt to misinterpret the Exodus as malicious intent. His intercession reflects mediation beyond instruction. He stood between judgment and people. Moses descended with the tablets of the covenant in his hands. When he saw the calf and the dancing, his anger burned, and he threw the tablets from his hands, breaking them at the foot of the mountain. The physical breaking symbolized covenant violation. He destroyed the calf, ground it to powder, scattered it on water, and made the Israelites drink it. The act demonstrated both repudiation of idolatry and confrontation of its consequences. The Levites were called to rally to Moses' side. They executed judgment within the camp, and about 3,000 men fell that day. The severity underscores the seriousness of covenant breach. The following day, Moses returned to the Lord to seek atonement. He offered himself as substitute if necessary, asking that his name be blotted out if forgiveness required it. The response clarified accountability. Each individual would bear responsibility for personal sin. Sinai, which began with thunder and covenant formation, now witnessed violation and mediated restoration. The covenant would not dissolve, but it would continue under awareness of human instability. The next act will examine the renewal of the covenant and the construction of the tabernacle as a visible sign of continued presence among a flawed nation. After the destruction of the golden calf and the breaking of the covenant tablets, the narrative enters one of its most critical transitions. The violation at Sinai was not an isolated failure, but a direct contradiction of the foundational commandments that had just been spoken. The people had pledged obedience, and within weeks, redirected worship toward a molded image. This breach created a structural question. Would the covenant collapse entirely, or would it be reestablished under revised conditions? The gravity of the situation lay in the fact that covenant relationship was the defining feature of Israel's new identity. Moses returned to the Lord with full acknowledgement of the offense. He described the people's sin without minimizing it and asked for forgiveness. His intercession advanced beyond earlier appeals made during the plagues. He offered himself as substitute, requesting that his own name be blotted out of the book if forgiveness required it. This was not rhetorical exaggeration, but a demonstration of leadership identification. Moses stood between divine judgment and national destruction. The response clarified that individual accountability would remain intact. Each person would answer for personal sin, yet the covenant would not be entirely erased. The Lord instructed Moses to lead the people toward the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. However, the warning that followed altered the tone of continuation. An angel would go before them, but the Lord declared that he would not go up among them in the same way, because they were stiff-necked and might be consumed along the way. This statement signaled reduced proximity. The earlier declaration at Sinai had emphasized dwelling among them as a holy nation. Now, presence was conditional and mediated differently. The people's reaction was immediate mourning. In response, the Israelites removed their ornaments, the same type of gold that had been used to fashion the calf. The removal symbolized repentance and recognition of loss. The text emphasizes that from Mount Horeb onward, they did not wear ornaments. This action reflected sustained acknowledgement rather than momentary regret. Covenant renewal required visible humility. Identity as a treasured possession could not coexist with ongoing idolatrous expression. Moses then established a tent of meeting outside the camp. This physical relocation carried symbolic meaning. Because of the breach, divine presence was no longer centered within the camp but placed at a distance. Whenever Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud descended and stood at its entrance. The people watched from their own tent doors and worshipped. The pattern reinforced mediated access. Moses spoke with the Lord face to face, meaning direct communication rather than visual exposure. Joshua, identified as Moses' assistant, remained near the tent, indicating leadership continuity. Moses pressed further. He appealed to divine favor and requested clarity regarding who would accompany them. He argued that if divine presence did not go with them, they should not depart from Sinai at all. This argument revealed a mature understanding of identity. Without distinguishing presence, Israel would become another migrating tribe. The Lord responded that his presence would go with Moses and give him rest. Yet Moses continued to intercede, asking that the entire nation be distinguished by that presence, not merely himself. The request to see divine glory followed. This was not curiosity, but desire for assurance. The response allowed partial revelation. Moses would see divine goodness pass by, and the name of the Lord would be proclaimed, but direct sight of the divine face was denied. He was placed in a cleft of the rock, covered until the passing was complete. The proclamation emphasized mercy, steadfast love, patience, and justice. This declaration became foundational to Israel's theological understanding of covenant character. The renewal phase established that covenant would continue, but under clarified awareness of both mercy and accountability. The people would move forward not because they had earned restoration, but because mercy operated within structured relationship. Sinai, once shaken by thunder and violation, now stood as site of mediated renewal. The next part will examine the rewriting of the tablets and the reaffirmation of covenant obligations. With the relationship preserved, the proximity altered, the next step was formal covenant renewal. Moses was instructed to cut to new stone tablets, like the first, replacing the tablets he had shattered at the foot of Sinai. This detail matters because the broken tablets were not just destroyed objects. They were the physical testimony of a violated agreement. Rewriting them signaled that the covenant would continue in documented form. But it also highlighted that continuation was not automatic. Moses had to ascend again, and the people had to accept renewed terms under renewed seriousness. Moses rose early and went up Mount Sinai, taking the 2 tablets in his hands. The narrative emphasizes preparation and precision. The Lord descended in the cloud and stood with Moses there, proclaiming the name of the Lord. The proclamation repeated and expanded covenant attributes, merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, yet not clearing the guilty. This combination defined covenant stability. Mercy would sustain relationship, but moral accountability would remain. Moses responded by bowing and worshiping immediately, reflecting recognition of the weight of what was being affirmed. Moses then renewed the request that the Lord go with the people. He acknowledged Israel's stubbornness directly, not defensively. He asked for forgiveness and for Israel to be taken as God is seen. The response included a covenant declaration. The Lord would do marvels not previously done in any nation, and surrounding peoples would see the work and fear. This was not abstract assurance, but a statement that Israel's identity would be marked publicly through events visible to nations. Covenant continuity would have external consequence, not only internal comfort. Renewal also involved reassertion of obligations that had been violated or threatened by cultural drift. The people were warned not to make covenants with the inhabitants of the land they would enter, not to participate in their sacrificial systems, and not to adopt their idol practices. This mattered because the golden calf episode revealed how quickly Israel could revert to visible worship forms drawn from surrounding cultures. The covenant renewal therefore emphasized separation from religious syncretism. It prohibited making cast metal gods and reinforced exclusive devotion. The renewed instructions reaffirmed the Feast of Unleavened Bread, requiring remembrance of deliverance from Egypt. It also reinforced principles about firstborn dedication and redemption. These commands connected national memory to ritual practice. They functioned as safeguards. Remembrance structured identity. When a nation forgets its origin story, it becomes vulnerable to new loyalties. The renewed covenant tied Israel's future to its deliverance history and maintained a cycle of remembrance that would resist drift. Moses remained on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights again, without bread or water, according to the narrative. During this time, the words of the covenant were written on the new tablets. Whether Moses wrote them or the Lord did is described with emphasis on divine authority. The result was the same. The covenant testimony was restored in tangible form. When Moses descended, a visible change occurred. His face shone because he had been speaking with the Lord. Aaron and the people were afraid to come near him. Moses had to call them back and deliver the commands he had received. Because of the fear generated by the radiance, Moses placed a veil over his face when speaking to the people, removing it when he entered to speak with the Lord. This detail matters because it added a new layer of mediation. The people could not endure direct exposure even to the reflected effect of divine encounter on their mediator. Covenant renewal restored relationship, but it did not eliminate the seriousness of holiness. The renewed covenant was now anchored in written testimony, reinforced by visible evidence, and carried forward with structured separation between divine presence and the community. The next part will move from renewal in words and tablets to renewal in practice, how the tabernacle was built and how presence returned to dwell. among the people in a regulated, visible way. With the covenant renewed and the tablets restored, the next phase required implementation. The instructions for the tabernacle that had been given earlier on the mountain now had to move from specification to construction. This shift from revelation to execution marked a critical transition. Israel was no longer at the stage of receiving commands. It was at the stage of responding with obedience. The success of renewal would be measured not by verbal affirmation, but by material compliance. Moses assembled the whole congregation of the people of Israel and began by restating the Sabbath command. Work would continue for 6 days, but the seventh was to be holy, a day of complete rest to the Lord. Even in the construction of sacred space, labor would not override covenant rhythm. This mattered because enthusiasm for building could not justify violation of established command. Obedience was to remain structured, not reactive. The call for contributions followed. The materials required for the tabernacle were specific: gold, silver, bronze, blue and purple yarns, fine linen, goats' hair, ram skins, dyed red, acacia wood, oil for the lamps, spices for anointing oil, and stones for the priestly garments. The people were instructed to give voluntarily from willing hearts. This detail stands in contrast to the forced labor system of Egypt. The same people who had once built under compulsion were now invited to contribute willingly for covenant purposes. Participation became voluntary rather than imposed. The response exceeded expectation. Men and women brought jewelry, fabric, and precious materials. Skilled craftsmen offered their expertise. Bezalel and Oholiab were specifically named as individuals filled with skill, intelligence, and knowledge to carry out artistic designs. The narrative emphasizes both divine gifting and human craftsmanship. The tabernacle would not be improvised. It would be built according to detailed pattern. Excess contributions eventually required Moses to restrain further giving because the materials were sufficient and more than enough. Construction proceeded in ordered sequence. The Ark of the Covenant was made first, overlaid with gold and fitted with poles for transport. The mercy seat was fashioned, including cherubim facing one another. The table for the bread of the presence and the golden lampstand were crafted with precision. The altar of incense and the altar of burnt offering followed. The courtyard, with its pillars and hangings, enclosed the structure. Each element matched prior instruction. Obedience was measured against specification, not creativity alone. Priestly garments were also made according to command. The ephod included engraved stones bearing the names of the tribes. The breastpiece contained 12 stones, representing the 12 tribes individually. The garments were not decorative additions. They symbolized representation. When the high priest entered before the Lord, he carried the names of Israel on his shoulders and over his heart. This detail reinforced mediation within worship structure. Leadership before God was representative, not isolated. When the work was completed, everything was brought before Moses for inspection. He examined the work and confirmed that it had been done as commanded. This evaluation stage mattered. Compliance was verified before use. The covenant renewal now had tangible expression. The people had moved from idolatrous construction of a calf to faithful construction of a sanctuary according to instruction. The transformation from misdirected zeal to ordered obedience defined this stage of national development. The next part will describe the moment when the tabernacle was erected and the visible sign of divine presence returned to dwell among the people. After the completion of all components of the tabernacle and the priestly garments, the final stage involved assembly and inauguration. The construction phase had demonstrated obedience. Now the structure had to be erected and activated according to instruction. Moses was directed to set up the tabernacle on the first day of the first month of the second year after leaving Egypt. This dating is important. Nearly 1 year had passed since the Exodus. The period had included departure, sea crossing, wilderness, testing, covenant formation, violation, renewal, and construction. The timeline underscores that national identity formation was not instantaneous. Moses erected the tabernacle precisely as instructed. He set up the frames, placed the bases, raised the pillars, and spread the tent over it. The Ark of the Covenant was placed inside the most holy place, and the veil was hung to separate it from the holy place. The table was arranged with the bread of the presence. The lampstand was set up and lamps were lit before the Lord. The altar of incense was positioned and fragrant incense burned. Outside, the altar of burnt offering was placed at the entrance, and sacrifices were offered upon it. The laver was positioned for washing between the tent and the altar. Every element functioned according to prior instruction. Aaron and his sons were washed with water, clothed in the priestly garments, and anointed. The anointing oil symbolized consecration. Their role was now formally established. They would serve as priests throughout their generations. The garments, previously constructed with precision, were now activated through ritual. This marked the transition from theoretical priesthood to operational ministry. Worship within Israel would follow structured mediation, and access to sacred space would remain regulated. Once everything was set in order, a visible manifestation occurred. The cloud that had guided Israel through the wilderness descended and covered the tent of meeting. The glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses himself could not enter the tent because of the density of the cloud. The same presence that had appeared at Sinai now rested upon the constructed sanctuary within the camp. This moment resolved the tension introduced after the golden calf incident. Divine presence had not been permanently withdrawn. It had returned under structured covenant conditions. The cloud functioned not only as symbol, but as operational guidance. Whenever the cloud lifted from over the tabernacle, the Israelites would set out. When it remained, they stayed camped. By day the cloud covered it, and by night fire was visible within it in the sight of all the house of Israel, throughout all their journeys. The presence that had once led them from Egypt now dwelled among them and directed their movement. Guidance was centralized around covenant structure rather than external miracle alone. This final scene of Exodus closes with order restored. A delivered population had become a covenant nation. Law had been given, violated, renewed, and embodied. Worship space had been constructed, and leadership had been structured. The people who had once panicked at the Red Sea were now organized around a portable sanctuary, marking divine presence at the center of their camp. The next act will move beyond Sinai into the ongoing wilderness journey, where the stability of covenant life would be tested again through internal descent and generational transition, with the tabernacle erected and divine presence visibly dwelling among the people. The structure of covenant life was in place. However, structure alone does not eliminate instability. The Book of Numbers records that once the people departed from Sinai and resumed movement toward the Promised Land, patterns of complaint and internal tension resurfaced. The cloud lifted, the camp was arranged by tribes in ordered formation, and the journey resumed according to divine direction. Yet progress toward Canaan would expose weaknesses that were not resolved by law alone. Soon after departure, the people complained about hardship in the hearing of the Lord. The text does not specify the initial grievance in detail, but notes that fire from the Lord burned at the outskirts of the camp. Moses interceded, and the fire subsided. The place was named Taborah, meaning burning. This episode demonstrated that covenant identity did not prevent discipline. The presence that guided also judged. Complaint had become a recurring reflex when discomfort appeared. The dissatisfaction intensified when a mixed multitude among them began craving other food. The Israelites wept again and remembered the fish, cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic of Egypt. The nostalgia is striking. Egypt, once associated with forced labor and oppression, was now remembered for its cuisine. Memory had become selective. The daily manna, though consistent provision, was described as inadequate. This reaction reveals psychological tension. Freedom without variety felt restrictive to those accustomed to predictable supply. Moses experienced leadership fatigue at this stage. He heard the weeping of families at their tent doors, Caleb perceived the weight of national discontent. He complained to the Lord that the burden was too heavy for him alone. His words reveal exhaustion. He questioned why he had been assigned responsibility for carrying the entire nation as a nurse carries a child. The scale of the population magnified strain. Covenant renewal had restored structure, but it had not reduced leadership pressure. In response, 70 elders were appointed to share the burden of governance. The spirit that rested on Moses was distributed among them, enabling them to prophesy. This administrative expansion echoed Jethro's earlier advice about delegation. Leadership within Israel was becoming layered rather than singular. However, shared leadership did not eliminate underlying dissatisfaction among the people. Quail were again provided in abundance, driven by wind into the camp. The supply was so great that it extended for a day's journey in every direction. Yet the abundance turned into judgment. While the meat was still between their teeth, a severe plague struck those who had craved excessively. The location was named Kibra Hatava, meaning graves of craving. This naming preserved memory of the event as warning. Desire unchecked by gratitude carried consequence. The wilderness journey thus revealed a pattern: provision, complaint, intercession, consequence. Covenant life required sustained trust, not episodic enthusiasm. The next part will examine the report of the spies and the pivotal moment that altered an entire generation's destiny. As Israel moved northward through the wilderness of Paran, the next major transition approached: entry into the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The journey from Sinai had not been aimless. It was directed toward Canaan. At this Tasha, Moses was instructed to send 12 men, one from each tribe, to spy out the land. This mission was strategic reconnaissance. It would assess geography, population, strength, agricultural productivity, and defensive structures. The objective was not curiosity, but preparation for occupation. The 12 spies traveled through the Negev and up into the hill country. They observed fortified cities and inhabitants described as strong. They cut down a cluster of grapes so large that it had to be carried on a pole between two men. The land was confirmed to be fertile and productive, flowing with milk and honey. However, alongside abundance, the spies reported the presence of giants, descendants of Anak, and heavily fortified urban centers. The reconnaissance revealed opportunity and resistance simultaneously. When the spies returned, their report divided into two perspectives. 10 of them emphasized the strength of the inhabitants and concluded that the Israelites were unable to overcome them. They described themselves as grasshoppers in comparison. This self-perception shaped the narrative. Fear reframed evidence of fertility into evidence of danger. Only Caleb, and later Joshua, offered a different interpretation. They argued that the land should be taken, asserting that the Lord would give victory if Israel trusted him. The people responded to the majority report with fear and grief. They wept loudly and complained against Moses and Aaron, proposing that it would have been better to die in Egypt or in the wilderness than to face battle in Canaan. They even discussed appointing a leader to return to Egypt. This reaction exposed generational insecurity. The nation that had crossed the Red Sea and witnessed plagues still measured future challenges by visible obstacles rather than past deliverance. Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before the assembly. Joshua and Caleb tore their clothes and urged the people not to rebel. They emphasized that the Lord was with them and that the protection of the land's inhabitants had been removed. Yet the assembly spoke of stoning them. The tension had escalated from complaint to attempted internal violence. At that moment, the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting before all the people. The Lord declared that the generation which had seen his signs in Egypt and in the wilderness yet tested him repeatedly would not enter the promised land. With the exception of Caleb and Joshua, those 20 years old and upward would wander in the wilderness for 40 years until that generation died. The number of years corresponded to the 40 days the land had been spied out. This was not impulsive judgment. It was structured consequence, tied to duration of investigation and magnitude of disbelief. The decision marked a turning point in Israel's history. Entry into Canaan was delayed. The journey that might have ended within months extended into decades. Leadership now had to guide a population under judgment rather than immediate promise. The next part will examine the attempted reversal by the people and the consolidation of wilderness. Years under Moses continued leadership. The declaration that the current generation would not enter the promised land did not immediately produce quiet acceptance. When the people heard that they would wander for 40 years, they mourned greatly. However, their response shifted quickly from grief to impulsive action. Early the next morning, they rose and attempted to go up toward the hill country, declaring that they would now take possession of the land. This sudden change did not reflect renewed faith, but reaction to consequence. They sought to reverse judgment without addressing the underlying distrust that had led to it. Moses warned them not to go. He stated clearly that the Lord was not among them in that action, and that they would be defeated before their enemies. He reminded them that Amalekites and Canaanites were in the valley, and that moving forward without divine authorization would bring loss. The warning emphasized timing and alignment. The earlier refusal had occurred when entry was commanded. Now the command had shifted to wandering. Obedience required accepting delay rather than forcing fulfillment. Despite this warning, the people advanced presumptuously. The Ark of the Covenant and Moses did not depart from the camp. This detail is significant. The symbol of divine presence remained stationary, and the appointed mediator did not accompany the attempted assault. The Amalekites and Canaanites came down and defeated them, driving them back as far as Hormah. The defeat confirmed Moses' warning. Courage without command proved ineffective. The episode reinforced that covenant relationship required alignment with instruction, not self-directed correction. The wilderness period that followed was not static waiting, but extended formation under consequence. Over the decades, the generation that had witnessed the Exodus aged and died. The Book of Numbers records periodic events that illustrate continued tension. One such episode involved Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, who challenged Moses' leadership. They accused him of elevating himself above the assembly. The rebellion was both political and religious, questioning exclusive priestly authority and centralized mediation. Moses responded by proposing a test involving censers before the Lord. The outcome was decisive. The ground opened and swallowed certain rebels, and fire consumed others offering unauthorized incense. The severity of the judgment underscored that leadership structure was not self-appointed, but divinely designated. Following this event, Aaron's staff was placed among tribal staffs and budded, confirming priestly authority symbolically. The rebellion did not merely threaten governance, it tested the integrity of covenant order. Another significant episode occurred at Meribah later in the wilderness journey. The people again complained about lack of water. Moses was instructed to speak to the rock, but in frustration, he struck it twice with his staff. Water flowed, but the act deviated from instruction. As a result, Moses and Aaron were told they would not bring the assembly into the promised land. This development introduced generational transition at the leadership level. Even the central mediator was subject to consequence for misrepresentation of command. The wilderness years were marked by a repetition of need, complaint, provision, and discipline. Yet beneath these cycles, a new generation was growing, one that had not witnessed Egypt firsthand. The older generation, shaped by slavery and immediate fear, was gradually replaced by those raised under covenant law and wilderness discipline. The next part will examine the final movements toward Canaan and the closing phase of Moses' leadership. As the 40 years of wandering approached completion, Israel's position shifted from survival to preparation for entry. The older generation had largely passed away, including many who had witnessed the Exodus and the events at Sinai. A new generation stood on the plains of Moab, east of the Jordan River, opposite Jericho. This geographic positioning was significant. The people were now within sight of the land, once refused. The transition from wilderness discipline to imminent occupation required renewed clarity of law and leadership succession. Before crossing into Canaan, Israel faced opposition from surrounding nations. The king of Arad attacked in the Negev, and Israel responded with organized resistance. Later, they requested passage through the territory of King Sihon of the Amorites. When Sihon refused and attacked, Israel defeated him and occupied his cities. A similar confrontation occurred with King Og of Bashan. These victories marked a contrast with the earlier failed invasion attempt after the spies report. This time, action occurred under instruction rather than presumption. The military success indicated that the new generation was operating in alignment with command. During this period, another internal challenge arose in the form of Balaam, a diviner hired by Balak, king of Moab, to curse Israel. The narrative records that Balaam attempted to pronounce curses, but instead delivered blessings. He declared that Israel was a people dwelling apart and that no curse could prevail against them when they were aligned with divine purpose. This episode reinforced the theme that external opposition could not override covenant commitment. However, subsequent events involving idolatry at Peor showed that internal compromise remained a danger. As Moses approached the end of his leadership, he addressed the people in extended speeches recorded in Deuteronomy. He recounted their history from Sinai onward, restated the law, and emphasized obedience upon entering the land. This repetition was necessary because the generation standing before him had not directly heard the original Sinai proclamation as adults. The covenant was renewed again through instruction and reminder. Moses stressed that prosperity in the land must not lead to forgetfulness of deliverance from Egypt. Leadership transition was formalized when Joshua was commissioned publicly. Moses laid hands on him before Eleazar, the priest, and the congregation. Authority was partially transferred, and Joshua was instructed to act according to the law given through Moses. The shift signaled continuity rather than rupture. The mediator who had confronted Pharaoh parted the sea and received the law would not cross the Jordan. The new leader would guide entry under established covenant framework. Moses ascended Mount Nebo to view the land from a distance. From that vantage point, he saw the territory promised to the patriarchs. The text records that he died there, and the Lord buried him in the land of Moab. His age was 120 years, and his strength had not diminished. The narrative concludes by affirming that no prophet like Moses had arisen in Israel, whom the Lord knew face to face, who performed signs and wonders in Egypt and mighty deeds in the wilderness. With Moses' death, the leadership era that began under a death decree in Egypt concluded on the threshold of fulfillment. The next act will summarize his legacy and examine his enduring impact on Israel's identity and law. Moses' life spans the defining transformation of Israel from enslaved labor force to covenant nation, positioned at the edge of territorial inheritance. His leadership encompassed confrontation with imperial power, mediation of law, crisis management in the wilderness, and structured succession. Few figures in ancient narrative combine political disruption, legal formation, military coordination, and theological mediation at the scale recorded in the Pentateuch. His legacy must therefore be evaluated across multiple dimensions: historical, legislative, national, and theological. Historically, Moses stands at the center of the Exodus event, which functions as the foundational act of Israel's national identity. The plagues destabilized Egypt's economic and religious systems, culminating in the release of a massive labor population. The crossing of the Red Sea neutralized Egyptian military pursuit and created irreversible separation. These events redefined Israel's status from enslaved minority to liberated collective. Whether examined within biblical tradition or through historical inquiry, the Exodus narrative establishes the origin point for Israel's communal memory. Moses is inseparable from that defining departure. Legislatively, Moses mediated the covenant at Sinai, receiving and transmitting a legal framework that structured worship, civil justice, and social ethics. The Ten Commandments established moral boundaries. The Book of the Covenant and subsequent laws expanded into detailed guidance governing property, restitution, priesthood, festivals, and Sabbath rhythm. These laws were not presented as abstract philosophy, but as operational statutes for national life. The covenant structure created a system in which authority derived from divine command rather than royal decree. Israel's law distinguished it from surrounding nations that centered legitimacy in monarchy. Nationally, Moses guided Israel through 40 years of formation under pressure. The wilderness period revealed instability, complaint, rebellion, and gradual generational replacement. Leadership required mediation during crises, intercession after failure, and administrative restructuring when burden became unsustainable. Episodes such as the rebellion of Korah, the report of the spies, and the incident at Meribah illustrate that Moses' authority was repeatedly tested. Yet he maintained continuity of direction, even when informed that he himself would not enter the land. His final acts involved reiterating the law and commissioning Joshua, ensuring transition rather than collapse. Theologically, Moses occupies a singular role. The narrative repeatedly states that the Lord spoke to him face to face. He functioned as mediator between divine instruction and national implementation. His intercession after the golden calf incident preserved covenant continuity. His appeals during moments of judgment reflect leadership defined by advocacy rather than personal elevation. Later, biblical texts consistently reference Moses as the lawgiver and prophet through whom the covenant was established. His authority became the benchmark for prophetic legitimacy in Israel's tradition. Moses' death outside the Promised Land underscores the tension between mission and fulfillment. He led Israel to the threshold but did not crush it. The land promise would be realized under Joshua, yet it would be governed by the law given through Moses. This separation of roles reinforced that covenant, not territory alone, defined Israel's identity. The nation entering Canaan carried with it a structured legal and worship system forged in the wilderness. The final part will draw together the implications of Moses' life and conclude this full examination of his enduring influence. Moses' legacy cannot be confined to the events of his lifetime. His influence extended beyond the wilderness generation and shaped Israel's structure for centuries. The legal corpus associated with him became the foundation of national governance. Kings who later ruled in Israel were measured against the law transmitted through Moses. Prophets appealed to it. When confronting injustice, priests administered sacrifices according to instructions first given at Sinai. Even during exile periods, Israel's identity was preserved through adherence to the covenant framework he mediated. His leadership established continuity that survived political instability. One of the defining features of Moses' role was mediation. He stood between Pharaoh and Israel, delivering demands backed by divine authority. He stood between God and Israel, transmitting law and interceding during rebellion. He stood between generations, guiding one out of Egypt and preparing another for entry into Canaan. Mediation required resilience. He absorbed complaint, confronted opposition, and negotiated crisis repeatedly. His authority was not self-appointed. It was commissioned and reaffirmed through events that demonstrated both power and restraint. The wilderness years revealed that leadership in covenant community involves more than dramatic deliverance. After the Red Sea, the work shifted toward formation. Complaints about food, water, and direction tested patience. Rebellions questioned legitimacy. Even Moses' own failure at Meribah demonstrated that leadership under pressure carries risk of misrepresentation. The consequence that he would not enter the land reinforced accountability. Covenant leadership did not exempt a leader from discipline. Authority and responsibility were inseparable. Moses' relationship with divine presence also distinguished his role. The text describes communication as direct and sustained. He received instruction in structured sequence, not fragmentary impulses. His face, shining after encounters at Sinai, symbolized proximity to revelation. Yet even he required mediation of glory through veiling. The narrative balances intimacy with limitation. No prophet like Moses arose afterward who performed signs in Egypt and spoke with the Lord face to face in the same manner. His uniqueness lay in both historical acts and relational access. When Moses died on Mount Nebo and was buried in Moab, Israel mourned for 30 days. Joshua succeeded him, filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid hands on him. The leadership transfer ensured continuity, but the era of foundational formation closed. Israel stood ready to cross the Jordan under Joshua's command, carrying with them law, memory, structure, and expectations shaped by Moses' leadership. The Exodus, Sinai, wilderness, discipline, and covenant renewal formed the national core. Moses' life, therefore, represents convergence, deliverance from empire, establishment of law, survival through instability, and preparation for inheritance. His story begins under a decree of death and ends overlooking fulfillment not personally attained. Between those points, he dismantled Egypt's labor system, confronted imperial authority, mediated covenant terms, and shaped a people into structured nationhood. His impact is measured not only by miracles recorded, but by the endurance of the legal and theological framework he transmitted. If this structured, chronological study has helped you understand Moses' life in greater depth, take a moment to like the video and subscribe for more long-form biblical explorations. In the comments, tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there, and answer this: which defined Moses, or his confrontation with Pharaoh, his mediation at Sinai, or his endurance in the wilderness years? This concludes our full-length study of Moses. From threatened infant to covenant mediator, from palace to mountain, from Egypt to the edge of promise,